What adjustments did you make as a father yourself based on your relationship with your father?
If I was going to accomplish any one thing in my life, that I'd be a better father to my kids than I felt my father had been to me. And in particular, that I would not be the terrifying figure that my sister and I often found my dad to be.
Welcome back to The Unknowns. My name is Charlie Stone, your host, and today we have Scott Turow. I didn't even say an interesting guest, because once you hear the word Scott and Turow, you know it's going to be interesting. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. You are an author, an attorney, 15 books, 30 languages, 30 million copies. My goodness, what a life.
It's been a blessed journey.
Well, good. We're going to talk about that. But speaking of 30 years ago, I don't know if you know this, but we actually shared a vestibule on a Metro train car. I was a young lawyer. I had read your book 1L, which sort of gave me confidence that maybe I could actually do this. And I had a great conversation with you in that vestibule. And then you exited the train. The problem was I was so tongue-tied that conversation was entirely in my head. We didn't have a conversation.
Okay.
So I'm happy 30 years later, here we are. We can finally have that conversation. I'm sure you've been waiting with bated breath.
I have been, and I'm sure that you have in mind all the questions that you wanted to ask 30 years ago.
Let's get into your career. What's fascinating, it spans so many interesting aspects. And Terry Hake actually spoke to my law school, and obviously you were involved in Operation Greylord. I'm curious if we can explore that a little bit from the context of, can you give a little background of what that was? Because a lot of people don't know what that was. Your role, and then how it shaped how you looked at justice moving forward.
Well, my view of justice in Cook County was shaped actually by my grandfather, whom I was very close to, and he told me a story about getting swindled by a relative. And I said to him, "Grandpa, why didn't you sue?" And his response to me was, "Me, poor man like me, said I can't afford to buy a judge." And that was my grandfather's view of justice in the state courts in Cook County. And to their everlasting and warmest credit, the late Tom Sullivan, U.S. Attorney in Chicago, Dan Reedy, the chief of the Special Prosecutions Division, because of a happenstance, a cooperating witness had appeared, they decided that they were going to launch an investigation of the Cook County judiciary, particularly the criminal courts. And ultimately, they concluded that the only way to do it effectively would be to have undercover agents working for the FBI and Attorney's Office. Terry Hake, whom you mentioned, was actually an FBI agent, but he was also a law school graduate. And so he posed first as a corrupt state's attorney, prosecutor, and then having proved his mettle to the corrupt bar, he then became a corrupt defense lawyer, paying judges to throw cases. I ended up with prosecutions against 2 judges, and at the meantime, Greylord went on and was ultimately exposed when somebody in the Department of Justice got loose-lipped with a reporter. But the secret had held in Chicago, which was really remarkable, because in order to send a corrupt, quote-unquote, corrupt state's attorney into the courts, we had to have the knowing cooperation of the state's attorney at that time, who was at that point Richard J. Daley, later the mayor of Chicago. And Rich kept that secret, never let anybody know that Greylord was happening, just as was true of the FBI agents.
Well, as a younger lawyer, that must have shaped your sense of both the coercive power of corruption and just everybody getting along with the corruption. Has that shaped what you wrote about, like with Rusty Savage and all of your Presumed Innocence, Presumed Guilty, all of these wonderful books that you created? How did that directly impact how you wrote those books?
Well, there's a line in Presumed Guilty, which I borrowed from myself, which is to say that being a prosecutor, develop a proctologist view of humanity.
Give me your sense of that. Obviously, a lot of discussion in the news today about U.S. attorneys being dismissed, the concept of weaponizing the U.S. attorney's office. It certainly rubs me, just the mere concept of it, the wrong way. How are you sort of thinking about that, and how are you talking about it? How can we ensure that does not?
Well, I'm a product of a Justice Department that was resolutely apolitical. I do not remember in my 8 years as an AUSA ever talking politics with an FBI agent, Secret Service agent. It didn't matter to the way they did their jobs. There have been some mess ups by the FBI, but I still have tremendous faith in the institution and certainly in the Justice Department. And as far as I could tell, they followed the evidence where it led. And of course, it led to some pretty high places. I don't now. Having said that, the fear, of course, is that those who think the department was weaponized will weaponize it as a form of revenge. And we'll see what happens. I think from what little I understand, Pam Bondi's a pretty good lawyer, and I'm not confident that she will tolerate seeing that department turned into an instrument of political vengeance. I certainly hope not. Her deputy, one of Donald Trump's defense lawyers, Todd Blanche, also has the reputation of being a real lawyer, not a political person. So I hope it doesn't happen. I see some forces of resistance within the department, but I could be completely wrong.
Do you sometimes get frustrated that you read the headlines and they're so bizarre and so head scratching that you're like, I wish I wrote that. I wish that was fiction.
Well, fortunately, we can always steal from life, Charlie. People forget fast. So look, there's been a lot of stuff, especially in the last decade, that nobody would believe. And and I think many of us in this country, whichever side that you're on, you have a sense that stuff is happening that they just can't believe. That it's like, if I get different political views than I do, I would look at the Joe Biden participated in that debate and say, how in the hell did anybody allow this man to have control over the levers of power? It's clearly no longer up to it. So there's been a lot on both sides that just seems beyond belief.
You've had a very storied career outside of the practice of law, award-winning novelist, and now you have your most recent book, Presumed Guilty, which is another bestseller. Must just get tired all the time having these bestsellers, right?
Yeah, it's a terrible experience.
So hard.
Because it's so awful, I would recommend it to
anybody, right?
It's a lot of fun.
But I'm curious because I'd love to know, I think it's a true story. I don't know, but when you were a lawyer and then you wrote Presumed Innocent and then it became a hit and your father was still like, well, you still have time for medical school? Like, is that a true story?
Well, it's through the repetitions, it's been slightly distorted, but I never knew if my father read anything that I wrote leading up to Presumed Innocent. But I made it a point of giving him a copy of the novel. And I heard nothing from him for about 6 weeks. And finally, I said, Dad, did you read the book? And he says, yeah, I read the book. He said, well, what do you think? He says, I still think you could have gone to medical school. And it's like, okay.
Yeah, thanks, Pop.
When he began to get a sense of the dimension of this thing, he was very happy about it. And in fairness to my dad, I remember before the movie premiered, Presumed Innocent premiered, there was a screening at the White House. And, I and my ex-wife were invited to come to the White House for dinner. And as it happened right frequently, guess what day my father had open heart surgery? But my dad, to his credit, said, look, I want you to get on that plane and go to D.C. And of course, despite the troubled nature of my relationship with my father, I didn't feel like I could do that until I knew he was out of the woods. But once he was out of the woods, it was the only time in my life I ever chartered a private jet, where we went to D.C. in time for dinner at the White House.
I don't know if anybody's ever asked you that, but the show is called The Unknown, so I'm always interested in unknown things. You become a parent yourself.
I have.
And so upon reflection, like we all do, right, what adjustments did you make as a father yourself based on your relationship with your father? What was some of the things that you were like, I'm not going to do that. And also my father did that extraordinarily.
Yeah. I mean, it was imperative to me, if I was going to accomplish any one thing in my life, that I be a better father to my kids than I felt my father had been to me. And in particular, that I would not be the terrifying figure that my sister and I often found my dad to be. Now, everybody's got their story and everybody's got their case. My dad lost his mother when he was 4 years old. And as an adult, I began to realize that he must have been incredibly jealous of my mother's attention. And so he regarded his children as his rivals. And from time to time, he looked at us like he hated us, because I'm sure there were times when he hated us. But when you're a small child and you see somebody glaring menace, it's really very troubling. And there was once an occasion, my son Gabe was about 2 years old and went to a nut bowl at my parents' house and fed himself a nut without permission. And my father loomed over him, shaking his finger, and I intervened. And I told my dad in front of a house full of company, you ever treat my children the way you treated me, you will never see them again. And to my son, that I had swooped in and protected him, that made a huge impression. I don't want this to be only a litany of complaints about my father. We had good moments. We were both intense sports fans, and we went to the Bears games and the Cubs games together. And I really look forward to those occasions, and I really enjoyed them. But, the bad stuff lingers, obviously, in every child. And so I tried to make sure I was never a figure of menace to my children. I think they would all agree that I wasn't. And I tried to give them as much attention as two very demanding careers allowed. My youngest used to be very critical of my efforts in those regards. Now that she's an adult with a very demanding job of her own, I think things are starting to come into respect.
Yeah, both my wife and I, when we go to our children's house, they're all out of the house, but we do feel it's sort of like we're having a 360 review by them, right? There's this stuff that comes up, and we love them and adore them. But did your father's character, or his ethos, did he appear as characters in your novels or bits and pieces?
I don't think there's any scene that I ever wrote which was a one-for-one reproduction of what went on between my father and me. But when people ask me, I went to law school after being a writing teacher at Stanford. What was it about the law so fascinating? My answer was and is that my childhood left me with a deep sense about how wrong it is to abuse power. And the instrument we have in this society to cabin the abuse of power and to punish it when it's really going wrong, as in Greylord, that's the law. And so it's never been a great mystery to me why so much of the law, feels like it's right here, somewhere between my heart and my intestine.
As you look back on your career and your life, is there any advice you give your 28-year-old self? Just to tweak that young man a little more. What would you tell that 28-year-old?
The best thing I could tell the 28 is relax. It's all going to work out, and you're going to have a life that will satisfy you by your own terms. Because, I wasn't all that sure about. And, when I was just a mess in my first year in law school because I'd given up this other career, and then I felt I was failing as a law student. It was like, oh my God, what corner are they going to find me sleeping? So, that would be one thing. The other much different kind of lesson is that what I came to learn over time, which is for most people, success in the arts is dependent talent, luck, but also persistence, and in particular, the ability to take a punch and to get back up. Because there are very few Mozarts in the world of literature. There was one Truman Capote. But generally speaking, people aren't finished novelists at the age of 17 or even 22. And, it's hard for those who want to understand that they're probably not going to get it right. And I certainly was doing everything I could, to get on the page as much of life as I understood, but I just didn't understand enough. I didn't understand enough.
Well, we're almost out of time, but I just want to reflect on this because this feels like when the wheel was invented, we knew what the wheel was. We certainly don't know where AI is going, but AI is certainly with students and others, and it's almost like a crutch. I assume you have an opinion on that, or do you think it's just dandy?
No, first of all, I'm not a Luddite. It's an amazing tool, but I'm peculiarly concerned as somebody who's once president of the Authors Guild and still on that board about what AI can do and has done. Most people are not aware that the large language models on which all of the different systems are based, whether it's Meta's or Bloomberg's or certainly OpenAI, that this is the allegation anyway, that they were educated by using a vast database of pirated books called Books 3. In other words, the future of artificial intelligence was written with stolen words. And the Guild and a large group of name brand authors, including myself and Grisham, Michael Conley, my friend David Baldacci, but we're suing, not for our own sake, but for the sake of people who don't have that power. The other problem with AI is that you're already getting situations where there are prompts being delivered. There was one a few years ago, which George R. Martin succeeded in stopping, but write me another volume, Tale of Fire and Ice. And of course, AI will try. If AI could produce works as profound as those of Tolstoy and Shakespeare, I would say, I want to read that just like everybody else. The problem is what it's produced thus far, and what I believe it will produce for quite a long time, is ersatz wreck. It's entirely derivative. But when you give people the opportunity to get a badly written and less well-imagined version of George R. R. Martin for free, many people will say, I didn't major in English. I don't really know that much of a difference. This seems amusing enough to me. And so is Gresham's law is that the bad currency drives the good currency out of circulation. And that's what I fear will happen if the AI companies get the sort of broad mandate that they keep asking for in different places. Never mind that we stole all of that stuff, and never mind that we can use this instrument to do bad things. That's nonsense. They're going to have to accept some reasonable legal restrictions on the use of these tools.
And my hope is being human and failing and being flawed is what gives the arts its richness, right? This sense of
yes,
right? And I don't think yet the robots have that. So maybe we
No,
bought some
they
time.
don't. Nor do they seem to have yet a deep sense of their own foibles. And they're, of course, although they like to use the word hallucinations, they're even unaware of mistakes. So it'll take a while till we really recreate human intelligence with a machine.
Well, we really appreciate your time today. Thank you. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, but it's been a great conversation, John. Thank you.